I'm a natural resource manager for Poland Spring. My name is Mark Dubois, which literally translates to be of the wood. But I'm actually a hydrogeologist for Poland Spring, and I grew up here in Maine and got education in Orono under a geological program. And I cover natural resources for Poland Spring all across the state of Maine. So I'm going to try to talk a little bit about groundwater today because it's an important issue going into this year. We hear a lot about groundwater in the news lately, and it does affect small woodlot owners or landowners as a basic property right. And that's what I was trying to focus on a little bit today and give you a little bit of information about water rights. Another big part of evaporation comes right off the surface of trees, of course, as you guys know. It's called evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration is a huge part of the water cycle in the summer seasons during the growing season, especially for a place like Maine. Either water is evaporated off the surface of lakes like Sebago Lake or Moosehead at vast quantities, or of course most of the state is covered with trees, so that evaporation of course is turned on. You see that evaporation shut off in the fall months with leaf off, and you'll actually see water levels in the groundwater rise up because of leaf off and the trees not losing the water anymore. It's an important part of our annual monitoring is to see that leaf off point. It all comes from rain and snow. It's a rapidly renewable resource. You guys count on 20 or 30 years to regenerate a tree lot. A company like Poland Spring counts on 2 recharge cycles per year. So about every month, every 6 months, whether it be November or the spring runoff, that's when we get our recharge, and that, as a geologist, that's when I see my crop come in, if you will. Even on a drought year, you get recharge to the ground during those 2 months, especially April and November. Groundwater recharge, which is the percolation of groundwater right down through the soil. It's no mystery that this little graphic over here is flat. You actually get more recharge on flat surfaces. Our Hollis plant in southern Maine is on a very, very flat sand and gravel aquifer. An aquifer actually has an economic definition directly from a geological dictionary down at the bottom here. It says that an aquifer is a body of rock that is sufficiently permeable to conduct groundwater and yield economically significant quantities of water to wells or springs. So that means that if the aquifer doesn't move water fast enough, it's not economically viable to withdraw water. And if you can't get the water out of the ground in an easy way, as in if you can't squeeze a turnip in a good way, you cannot yield water in an economically viable sense. So when we look at aquifers in the state of Maine, we have either sand and gravel aquifers or we have bedrock aquifers. These are mapped in most places. Most populous places in the state of Maine are mapped by the Maine Geological Survey. They produce sand and gravel aquifer maps, which are basically just the surface here. This is a cutaway of the earth, of course. A good sand and gravel aquifer will have an expression of the water table here, which is fully saturated sand and gravel. Somewhere beneath the land surface where the water percolates down, once it collects and forms a surface that you can measure, you call the water table. That is basically the top of the sand and gravel aquifer. Beneath sand and gravel in all places in Maine is the bedrock aquifer. Bedrock aquifers, you can see we painted this mostly gray, and there are blue fractures in here. Believe it or not, a bedrock aquifer only yields water on the fractures. So the permeability, if you will, part of the aquifer definition in bedrock relates to these fractures, which may be only 5, 10, 15% fractured rock, depending on where you live in the state of Maine. So we have some rocks that are very, very tight down by the coast, and some islands that have a very hard time trying to get water out of those rocks because they aren't a very good aquifer. That's what's really good about the sand and gravel aquifer is that permeability can be up near 20 and 30% by volume, as opposed to maybe 5% in the rocks. If you drill a well in the bedrock aquifer, and most, a lot of wells in Maine, properly constructed new wells are in bedrock. If you drill a well like this in the bedrock aquifer, you don't intercept a fracture. You've drilled basically a very expensive well that yields no water. And some of us have had that experience of paying the well driller for something that doesn't yield water because they did not hit either a fracture or that body of rock is not a very good aquifer. For instance, Poland Spring, and in my job at Poland Spring, we target and look at only sand and gravel aquifers. They yield not only the best volume of water and can also produce the largest volume of springs they also produce the best quality of water. There's not much interaction with minerals in that sand and gravel aquifer, not a lot of iron, not a lot of manganese around to add what you might call contamination or taste profiles to the water. So you also get the cleanest water at the surface. Not only does it recharge rapidly, it's very clean, it turns over very fast, and it also can be yielded, that water can move and yield towards springs in a quick way. I'm going to talk a little bit about groundwater law here, and this is going to be an important topic, I feel, this year in the state of Maine, and as it is most every year, at least in my job, but I think it's been particularly interesting for you folks based on what I've heard out in the public and some of the discussions that I've had with not only farmers but woodlot owners in Maine. So is groundwater owned and regulated the same as trees, is my question to you today. And I did up a couple of slides here. I'm no lawyer, so as I said, I'm a geologist. I'm going to give it in very simple terms here. But water law in the United States is basically inherited from the English upon colonization. And I don't know exactly when they brought over the laws. We know when the ships landed, but when did the laws land? I called my lawyer this morning, so I roughed it out to the 16 to 1700s, so somewhere after colonization. Basically, folks throw around the term absolute dominion about water law, and I think it's really a very inaccurate term. Absolute dominion does not explain water law in Maine. A much better term might be called modified reasonable use. You cannot basically withdraw water from your site and impact water supplies at your site in an adverse way. A couple of the key concepts, and one of which I just alluded to, which is you can't dry up your neighbor's well. One of the regulation tools that the DEP actually uses on Poland Spring and other water users is to make sure that you don't dry up or adversely impact neighbors' wells. You have to measure wells within close proximity of your withdrawal point. So that might be similar to, I guess, harvesting trees and then getting a forestry report afterwards and make sure that the harvest was done in a responsible way, something along those lines. So the example, at least in our permitting and our work with regulations in the state of Maine, is domestic monitoring or just checking aquifer conditions on the outside of the boundaries of the property that you own. And we have to do that a lot. In Hollis, for instance, we do 10 domestic wells in Hollis, so we actually have transducer devices that measure water levels in a perimeter sense around our site in Hollis, around the land that we own, and actually on homeowners' land. And those devices go off every 4 hours, and we have basically the Hollis plant opened in 2000. We have 8 years of record from Hollis. Is habitat and streams and wetlands that are nearby, because we're always working in spring areas. Those are always wet areas. You guys know where they are. You don't want to go down there and get stuck and all muddy and such. So those wetlands, of course, have a very specific set of rules, not only in the forestry realm when you're trying to not to cause mud or disturb vernal pools, but as a groundwater geologist or a person that wants to withdraw water from their land, you actually have to follow several standards, including Chapter 587, which was initiated, I think, 2 years ago or so, which is in-stream flow rule law, where you cannot withdraw water to the point where you are jeopardizing habitat for fish. Fish almost have more rights than humans in some senses. You also have to measure the quality of that water, and we do that by checking macroinvertebrates and actually checking out the biodiversity or the abundance of critters that live in the beds of streams or in the beds of springs. And we do that not only for those macroinvertebrates, we also do it for trees and wetlands as well. In 2007, a new law was passed called Chapter 399, which means that a water withdrawer like Poland Spring has to follow the Natural Resource Protection Act and actually file for a DEP permit in order to withdraw water. If you hit a certain threshold of water withdrawal, you do trigger these regulations for withdrawal. There are exemptions for farming and agriculture. When you trigger those DEP laws, it triggers some of those in-stream flow rules that I mentioned and other things. We also have a bulk water transport statute in Maine, which is a little bit unclear right now, but our company has to file with the Department of Human Services to be able to transport and use spring water. On the federal side, we're also, once we've done all of our state permitting and actually in some cases permitting in individual towns. We also have to meet federal Food and Drug Administration requirements that cause you or force you to prove that your product is spring water. And you also have to market that water as a food product. So the FDA has another umbrella regulation over a company like Poland Spring. At every site that we have in Maine, there is ongoing monitoring. Most of them are monthly reports. There's 8 different classifications for bottled water, if you will. Bottle of Aquafina over there, you'll see that label will say bottled water. That is simply municipal water that's cleaned up, filtered, put into a bottle.